We've been in this conversation called Jesus Saves and a post-evangelical reframing of salvation, and we're going to finish it today. This is it. And it always makes me happy when I say that and no one applauds. Do you know what I mean? Because that means you love it so much. You're like, don't finish it. All right. We're going to finish it, though we could go on and on. Let's do this. I want to jump into John 14. If you weren't here last week, I don't even know what else to say other than it's really helpful for everything I'm going to say today to know what I said last week. Because last week, all we did was set up the context to arguably what's probably one of the most controversial verses in the Bible. And so it's really important if you're going to fully understand this week that you know a little bit of the backstory that we shared last week, all right? But John 14:6 is the text that says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. This has been kind of known as the proof text for many evangelicals and Christians. Proof text to exclude all Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, any other religion that is not Christianity. And then to be real honest, it not only excludes all of them, but even a lot of folks who espouse to this idea that Jesus is the only way. What we said last week was, do they really mean Jesus is the only way, or do they really mean my understanding of Jesus is the only way, or my beliefs about Jesus are the only way? And so this is the verse that we're going with. Let me set up a little bit. I'll give you just so you know who the audience is. That's helpful. Because one of the things that we've been talking about is placing this verse in its context is really helpful. So real fast, the book of John is not a part of what scholars call the synoptic gospels. Synoptic gospels are Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And if you've ever read through the gospels, I am curious, by the way, this will help me. Most of you, a lot of you grew up evangelical, but how many of you have ever read through all of the gospels? Like just... Okay, wow, a lot more. Okay, that's wonderful. If you've ever read through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke kind of all make sense. And then when you get to John, you're like, what drugs were this guy doing? Because, just from the start, it's like in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And it's just like really, it feels like it's written in just cryptic code. It's very mystical, and there's just a lot happening in John that's so different than all the other Gospels. And so it's helpful to know a little bit about what was going on when this gospel was written, because it is the latest gospel that was written. It's written somewhere between, scholars say, 95 Common Era and 110 Common Era. It's written to Jews who found in this Jesus, this Messiah Jesus, the way to connect with the divine, all right? And something transpired, so you know, in 88 Common Era, or around 88 Common Era, you had kind of the more Orthodox Jews, which John's just calls the Jews. And the Orthodox Jews excommunicated these Jews that were finding the divine in Jesus. And so the Orthodox Jews, the gatekeepers, said, nope, we're not going to have that. So they excommunicated these other Jews who I call the revisionist Jews, all right? Now, I want to be clear. I said this last week, but I want to be even more clear today if I can. This is not a fight of Judaism and Christianity. Christianity did not exist at the time of this writing, all right? You had people that were called Christians, which was actually a derogatory term that was not given by the people, but given by the empire about these Jesus followers. But the organization or the religion Christianity didn't start until later. So every time you read the Bible, you're like, whoa, look at that. Paul's a great Christian. Paul wasn't a Christian. Christianity didn't exist. Jesus wasn't a Christian. Christianity exists. These were all folks who were a part of Judaism. So the squabble that you have in John is not Christian versus Judaism. The squabble is like within the family of Judaism, all right? And you had Judaisms, plural. So you had like these Orthodox Jews who were like, I'll tell you what, we find Yahweh by keeping the commandments. We find Yahweh through the Torah. We find Yahweh through Moses. And then you had like a new movement. Something that was transpiring. People were beginning to question these things, and a new movement was happening. And it was a group of Jews within Judaism going, we found this guy, Jesus. He's a rabbi. He's going around teaching, and he's healing people. And he keeps doing really bizarre things. Instead of just like loving your neighbor as the Torah is, which is great, he keeps saying radical things like love your enemy. And we're like experiencing Yahweh through this man. And the Orthodox Jews had just had enough of it. And so they excommunicated these revisionist Jews, and it became this kind of battle of Moses versus Jesus. And essentially the Orthodox Jews, when they excommunicated them, just said, you're no longer a part of the faith of our mothers and fathers. And so John is writing to these excommunicated Jews. John, or whoever's writing in the name of John, or a community is writing in the name of John, is writing to these excommunicated Jews, and these excommunicated Jews are also trying to argue their reasoning of how they have arrived at what they have arrived at. And so what you find in John 13 through 17 is a whole section. It's called the farewell discourse. And you have this final supper that Jesus has with his students. He washes their feet. Then he goes into delivering his final speech. In chapter 13, he says, I'm about to leave, but I give you a new commandment. Now think about that. There are a lot of commandments in the Old Testament that the Orthodox Jews espouse to. And these new revisionist Jews are all sitting around, and they're reading these letters, and they're writing these letters, and John is writing to them, and they're like, okay, what is it you want us to know? And Jesus is just like, we've got Jesus saying this. I give you a new commandment. I know you've gotten 613 from the Torah. I know you've gotten a lot from Moses, but I want to give you one. What a phenomenal idea. And in that moment, the new commandment is very simple, yet very complex. And Jesus says, I give you a new commandment to love one another. And then you have a question that arises in this dinner that they're having together. It's like Jesus goes into his speech, and somewhere through it, he pauses. He says, anyone have any questions? And of course, these students have been with him his whole life. And so sure enough, one person raises their hand and says, yeah, I have a question. Where are you going? Which, there's some heartache underneath that. Why are you abandoning us? Because we've been waiting for a Savior. The empire has their boot on our neck, and our entire heritage is one empire after another, pressing us to the ground. And all we've ever asked from God is that he would come and rescue us and liberate us and save us. And we believed you were the man that were going to save us. So tell me, where exactly are you going? Why are you leaving us? And it's really interesting that Jesus says, he goes into a metaphor, but he says, well, where I'm going, you cannot go. Because it was Peter who's like, where are you going? And Jesus is like, well, I'll tell you where I'm going, but you can't go there. And what he says is, I'm going to be executed. I'm going to suffer. And I'm going to die, but I must do all of this by myself. But don't be discouraged, Peter. Don't be discouraged, students, because this isn't the end, but a beginning, a new experience with the divine. And so he goes into a metaphor and he says, in my Father's house. So this is where I want to pick up, all right? Last week we talked about the metaphor, because for many of us who grew up evangelical, and we thought about it as there's an actual translation, which is a terrible translation, by the way, of the word mansions. And so many people got the idea that when you die, you're going to have a mansion in heaven, and this is where we got a lot of that idea from, which a lot of people did interpret that way for some time. But then what scholars realized as they got into it is actually when Jesus talks about his Father's house, he makes a reference about his Father's house earlier in John, and it has nothing to do with some mansion in heaven. His Father's house was the temple. And then when you begin to understand that the Father's house is the temple where the divine and the human come together, then you begin to realize what Jesus is doing in the context of this moment, because it's the temple, which is the Father's house, but then all of a sudden he moves it to his body, because he says the temple will go down, but in 3 days later it will rise again. What is that? His body. So it's almost as if, hang with me, Jesus is he's moving. It's a brilliant pedagogy, all right? He's a teacher, he's a rabbi, and he realizes he's going to throw something on his students that's so mind-blowing that it might destroy their minds, blow them up. Have you ever had one of those encounters before? Nothing thrills me more than when someone comes to Vinings Lake, and I always know they come through the line and their eyes are either wide open, oh my God, that was church? I have never seen, you borderline walked blaspheme. You know what I'm talking about? And I'm like, I know, welcome, all right? But then nothing else thrills me more. Just a couple weeks ago, I was standing back here, and this sweet lady came walking over, and she had some questions, and then immediately in our conversation, it's it's more than, I won't even give it the word epiphany. It's alters the course of the direction of the rest of your life type of thing. You know what I'm talking about? And I think this is what Jesus knows. And I don't know that we're even close to scratching what Jesus was even attempting to show, do, say. But I think we're certainly sniffing out the trail, all right? But I don't think we fully grasp it. And that's a part of what I think our task is as a collective, is that I think we need to continue to dig at this, because I think it's so monumental that the human species has yet to even get close to understanding what exactly is happening in this man, Jesus. And so it's like Jesus knows, and so he just takes it very gradual. Very gradual. Because you can't go from A to Z that fast. You just can't go. Because even if you tried, because I've done this, I've sat down with people in my past life. It's hard. Anybody else struggle sitting down with people from 2 lives ago? Or 10 lives ago? I had someone from my high school days reach out to me, and they're like, can you explain what's going on in your spirituality? And I'm like, oh my God. Where would you begin? Where would you begin? So this isn't uncommon. I have people like this all the time that I grew up with or heard me speak, because I traveled for 10 years to speak. And what happened was all those students, because I did a student thing, all those students kept following me. And now all the students have watched what's happened in my life and in our church. And many of them will reach out and be like, I heard you speak. We've had people show up here at this church and say, hey, I don't know if you remember me, but I was at such and such student camp and I heard you speak 15 years ago and I came in here, and what happened to you? Do you know what I'm talking about? And I'm literally just like, oh my God, where does one begin? I've had people ask me, hey, I have a serious question. You affirm same-sex marriage. How did you arrive there? And then the question is, where do you begin? Do you know what I mean? How do you get... And you want to talk about something that's maddening. It never works. It just doesn't work. And I'm very careful to say never, all right? But it does not work. So do yourself a favor, save your energies. But trying to get someone from A to Z in 3 seconds, not going to happen. Because here's my observation of it. They have to have their own experience. Now, you may have triggered something for them, but they're going to need to go on their own journey to arrive at the space that they need to arrive at. And so we've had people come in here and be like, absolutely not. This is blasphemy. It's heresy. We will not support same-sex marriage. I'm using this as an example, okay? Great. It's not uncommon a decade later to see them sitting out here going, I am so sorry, but I missed something. What did you miss? And then it come to find out they had a daughter, and the daughter got a little bit older and started kind of feeling out her own sexuality and realized, oh my gosh, this is where I'm at. And it's a game changer when your own flesh and blood is the one who's gay. Do you know what I'm talking about? And so this is what I'm saying. You take your hands off. You can't make people believe certain things. And so let them have their own journey. Okay. And you're like, well, what if they never arrive there? Well, what's that to you? Okay. If they never arrive there, hey, check this out. I actually still believe in the restoration, renewal, redemption of all things. See them in heaven. It's going to be a good time. It's going to be a good time. All right. Now, all of that said, I think this is what Jesus is doing. So he says, the divine and table of my Father's house. And then he makes a progression because he can't get him there that fast. So he's like, and here's what I want you to see about me. And this is what I believe is the whole point of John 14:6. The divine and the human don't just come together in the temple. The divine and the human comes together in me. This is what I believe Jesus is trying to say. And he's making that point so he can get to his final point, which is towards the end of John 14, where he says, the divine and the human is in me. Can you see that? Now, let me tell you this. That divinity is not just excluded to Jesus. The divine and the human also come together in you. And that was just too much for this group of people to hear. And I think that's what the Johannine community, that's what John is doing in general. That's why it's so mystical to me. It's the Richard Rohr book in the Bible. If you were like, what book would Father Rohr write? It would be John, all right? And turns out he did write a lot about John in his book, The Universal Christ, if you want to read it. But it's a complicated, complex thing that I'm trying to give you. And it's like, how else can you explain it? The best way is to place it in human form so you can see it. All right? So let's let's read this. This is we'll pick up John 14:1. Okay, so the idea is not that there are mansions in heaven. Jesus was talking about a metaphor for the presence of God. That's what the divine and the human come together. All right, he is reassuring them their place in the family of God. Jesus wasn't talking about a mansion in heaven, but about a place of belonging in the presence of God. And this is why he says, do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. Here's the metaphor. In my Father's house, there are many dwelling places. Many dwelling places. People, many dwelling places. You can get to the divine and experience his presence because there are many dwelling places. All right? If it were not so, I would have told you that I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, so that where I am, there you may be also. That's not a reference to a second coming. It's a reference to the resurrection and the Spirit or the Paraclete that follows. Verse 4, and you know the way to the place where I am going. Now, here's where it kicks in. Thomas said to him, all right, first you had Peter, who's like, tell me where you're going because I'm going. And Jesus is like, no, you're not, because you're going to deny me 3 times, okay? Now you get to Thomas. Thomas is like, okay, Lord, we do not know where you're going. How can we know the way? Show us the way. And Jesus looks at Thomas and says, and here's the infamous line, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you know me, you will know my Father also. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. Philip steps in, says, well, I got a question, Lord. Show us the Father and we'll be satisfied. I love that. Jesus said to him, I've been with you all this time. I think he said it in that way. I've been with you all this time, Philip, and you still do not know me? This is a giant statement, by the way. Look at this statement. Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. Let me just stop there. Can any of you all make that declaration? Come on now. Can you imagine what would happen to all of us who walked around? It's like, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Crucify him, please. Jesus said to him, I've been with you all this time. Philip, do you still not know me? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? There it is. There it is. Now follow me. So we just moved from the temple. Now Jesus is making all these wild declarations like, don't you know I am in the Father and the Father is in me? You know his disciples are like, God, it's all too mystical. What are you saying? What do you mean? I mean, it's like New Age oneness. Ooh, I'm in you and you're in me and we're all in each other and we're in the chair and the chair's in me and da-da-da-da. Do you understand? If you're listening to this, you're like, what are you saying? I don't get it. But when you do, like, here's my point. If we can just skirt around the edge and just get a taste of it, I'm telling you people, it will be an expansion in your mind greater than any herb this planet could produce to expand your mind. I mean, right in the heart of the text, just whop, open you up in ways that you will never walk the same again, because every person you encounter, everywhere you go, all of a sudden you'll start seeing things completely different. He says, I am in the Father and the Father is in me. Very truly, I tell you, the one who believes in me will also do the works that I do. And in fact, God, look at this, will do greater works than these. You think Jesus was something? Jesus is like, guys, I'm about to be out of here, so stop clinging to me and go out there and do more than what I did. Verse 17. This is the Spirit of truth, whom the world, I like to use the word system there, because the world got in high school, it was always like worldliness. And it got me to a place where I thought the world was evil, but that's actually Gnosticism. I don't think the world is evil. I think the world is actually inherently sacred. So here would be helpful when you're reading the Bible and when it talks about world or worldliness. I place the word system in there. I like that because I think it talks about empire for sure. So whom the system cannot receive because it neither sees him nor knows him. You know him because he abides with you and he will be in you. I'm not going to leave you orphaned. They were so scared. You're going to leave us. I'm not going to leave you orphaned. I am coming to you. In a little while, the world will no longer see me, but you will see me. You know why? Because I live. You also will live. And on that day, you will know that I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. Whoa. Okay. Let's get here. He says, how can we know the way? First of all, let me just say something. Thomas' question about knowing the way is not asking Jesus, Jesus, I have a question after everything you just said. Are all non-Christians going to hell? You cannot find that question in this story. So anybody that wants to use this text to exclude anyone who doesn't believe like them, let's just start in its context. Thomas is not raising his hand going, Jesus, quick question, who's going to heaven? Jesus, quick question, if you're not a Christian, are you going to hell? That's not the question that's being asked here. This conversation is not even about when we say Jesus is the way to heaven. Heaven's not mentioned in this text. It's just not there. So it would be helpful for us, and by us I mean evangelicals, if we would stop placing ideas in the mouth of Jesus that he just didn't say. He's not talking about the afterlife. Jesus is the only way. The only way to what? That's the question. The only way to what? Because we're not talking about heaven here. What we're talking about is the presence of the divine. What we're talking about is communion and experience of the divine. And it's in this moment that Jesus steps up and says, oh, you want to know the way to experience the divine? You want to know the way, the path to sacred, to ultimacy, to holiness? You want to know that way? I got you one. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. Now, you could read that in this way. The way I've lived my life, this being Jesus, the way I've lived my life is the way you can live yours. This is not about knowing the word Jesus or the name Jesus. It's not even about believing in what is said about Jesus that is the way. Rather, the way is what we see in the life of Jesus. So, of course, it makes sense. This is why again and again, Jesus keeps saying, all right, I'm going to leave you. And some of you are confused like, okay, so how do we experience the divine without you? Because we've experienced it in you. So how do we get there? And Jesus saying, hey, if you forget, just know this. I am the way. Look at my life. And this is why, by and large, I believe even as most of us as ex-evangelicals or post-evangelicals, we're still hanging on to it because we realized, first of all, that whole religion, Christianity, and this is my opinion, I should preface, you're not going to find a proof text for it. Christianity is what hijacked the movement of Jesus. Christianity is what hijacked the movement of Jesus. And I know we can parse this and it sometimes can sound confusing. And my goal here is not to confuse you. I hope this liberates you and helps you. Years ago, I remember coming to this realization through a man named Erwin McManus. Erwin McManus was he was the gateway drug to Rob Bell, and Rob Bell was the gateway drug to all kinds of heresy. But Erwin McManus I used to jam on him, man. He's a pastor of a church called Mosaic in California, and I used to listen to him night and day, absorb my body with his readings and writings. And I remember one time in passing, he said something like this that shook me to my core. He said, the greatest enemy to the movement of Jesus is Christianity. The greatest enemy to the movement of Jesus is Christianity. I remember hearing that going, whoa, that's deep. And then I come to realize over studying church history that there's actually a lot of truth in that. That Christianity, the religion, is not what Jesus intended. I don't believe he came to show us or give us a new religion. I believe he came to show us a new way to be human. But, check it out, we love capitalism, turns out. We love it. I mean, by us, I mean humans. The human species will make money off anything. It's like we can look at the most pure thing, like, how can we make money off that? You can look at an infant can be born from a mother's womb, and within seconds we're going, this could be profitable. And wouldn't you know, there's this pure innocence movement of Jesus happening. And I don't know how to tell you this. And women, you're off the hook because it was a group of guys that met together and they're like, we're going to convene for a convention. And there's and then we're going to write the rules and regulations. We're going to call them creeds. And we're going to make this thing official and watch it make money and get power. And turns out, check this out. I mean, for well over, 1,800 years now. There's not a lot of businesses that last that long. I mean, even during the dot-com boom, things exploded, but then eventually they faded because time progresses. Check out, there's one industry, maybe a couple. First, death. That's a profitable industry. If you're in the death business, you don't really have a lot to worry about. Like, at least not yet. Maybe one day they'll figure out how not to die, but for now, you don't have anything to worry. Your business is going to be fine, all right? You don't really have slow days. You know what I'm saying? Now, you may have busier days than others, but you don't really have slow days, all right? So it is with this profitable industry called Christianity. I mean, it's been really successful, and it's made so many people so much money. And this is what I'm saying, why I think it's so spectacular that Vinings Lake, because we gather every Sunday, and yes, it can become monotonous. And I told Taylor this week, I was like, we got to flip it up a little bit. It's getting too predictable in there. People know Cody's going to get up and say, welcome to Vinings Lake. Here's a card. If you're new, da-da-da. Oh, guess what? We tricked you. We said 11, but we really started 11:10. Right? Like all that, but then you people are brilliant, and now you're like, we're on to you, all right? So you come 11:10. So I said, Taylor, next week start at 11, and then let's not do music first. I'm going to get up and teach first. And my professor said, yeah, when people pull out of their driveway, they pull out every day and they don't even look. He's like, throw a bicycle behind the car every now and then to mix it up. And I'm like, yes, right? So yes, it becomes predictable, and sometimes it becomes monotonous, and some of you love that. You're like, don't change anything, all right? Others of you are like, it's getting boring in here. Change it up. Yep, we're working on it, all right? But here's what I'm saying. There's something magical, because every time we come together, I'm like, oh my God, check this out. It's the thing I'm committed to, and one of the reasons why I'm committed to it is because it's the only space that I have regularly in my schedule that I get to walk against culture. I mean, this is as subversive of a space as I get to be a part of. And it's like we're all in here going, okay, let's talk about it. Let's open our minds and our hearts and see the way in which the empire is moving. And what if we could somehow find our roots in that early Jesus movement? And I know yes, we've all been jaded. Check it out. We've all been messed up by the system. But what if in some way we could go back and almost work against the system, and we could keep the purity of this whole thing and just say, there was something beautiful about the early Jesus movement, and what if we could be like that? Right here in the midst of Mableton. How amazing would that be? And this is a part of what's happening here. So when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and life, he's like, yeah, I'm about to leave. And it's going to get confusing. Yes, there's going to be a whole institution that hijacks this beautiful movement. And it's going to take it, and it's going to run with it, and it's going to just distort it in so many ways. But I need you to know something when you get confused, because I got to tell you, sometimes it is confusing. There have been days where I've told Katie, hey, I think I'm done with all of it. And those are usually the days where the Spirit knocks on my heart and says, you're done with what? Tell me what you're done with. And here's what has happened. Follow me. You might experience this. Those are the days where I wrestle in my heart because somehow I have confused the religion of Christianity with the movement of Jesus. And in those moments, it's been moments where I'm like, what are we actually doing here? And I've realized, oh, you've blended those two together and they're not actually the same. So if there is a way in your mind to compartmentalize and say, this whole organization that has hijacked the movement of Jesus, roughly, I would say around the time of Constantine is when the Roman Empire got in bed with this movement. But if we could somehow have a gathering, a collective of people that's subversive to that, well, now that's worth giving my life to. And so Jesus says, you're going to forget, just hear me. When he says, I am the way, the truth, life, he's not saying the name Jesus. He's not even talking about what you believe about Jesus. He's saying when you're confused and you don't know where to go or what to do, and when there are moments where it's confusing on what is happening with Christianity, what is happening with American Christianity, it's all open in the arms. I don't even know if I would ever call myself a Christian. What is going on? The greatest enemy to the movement of Jesus Christ is Christianity. Wait, what's happening? And if you've ever felt confused, it's almost as if Jesus is going, hey, this is why we keep gathering and coming back. And check it out. I'm not even going to apologize for this. This is why I keep opening a Bible. And I might sound a little conservative to some of you liberals in here, and I like it. All right? But I'm telling you, this is why I keep going back to Jesus. And I believe the larger movement that is transpiring is a death to the thing that hijacked the actual movement to begin with. And so let it die. Let that shell die. Let Christianity go bankrupt. And if we can assist in the bankruptcy, let's do it. Because I think merging out of all of that is this beautiful, beautiful image. And it's like Jesus is saying in this moment, when it gets all complex, just keep coming back here. And if you don't know how to live or what path or how to experience the divine, just look at my life. Just look at my life. And this is why he says again and again, John 14:15, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. In this same chapter, this is what he says. Just to be clear, did you hear that? Because I have had voices in my head, and we good? All right. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. This same chapter, by the way. So if you're like, I am the way. If you love me, you commandments. Check out verse 23, same chapter. Jesus answered him, to those who love me will keep my word, and my Father will love them. And this is great. We will come to them and make our home with them. That's back to the Father's house thing. Verse 31, I do as the Father has commanded me. This is Jesus speaking. So that the world may know that I love the Father. Verse 28, Jesus says, the Father is greater than I. Listen to that. Because there are some scholars who believe Jesus is making a claim, his Christology, he's making a claim to be God in this moment, and maybe certainly the Johannine community believe that. But if you keep reading in the chapter, it's really interesting because Jesus says, the Father is greater than I. Verse 32, that the world may know that I love the Father. It's as if Jesus is showing us, yes, stay true to this path. I am the way. You have experienced the divine through me, and I'm about to leave. Don't get discouraged. When you get in there, I need you to understand, when there are confusing moments, realize that what you've seen in my life and through my life is the way. And perhaps this is why in the book of Acts, they weren't just called Christians a couple times as a derogatory term. But if you were to ask me, what did the early Jesus people call themselves by choice? People of what? The way. The way. It's the only language they had. The way of what? Glad you asked. Brian McLaren said it this way, and it sums it up the best I can say. I believe Jesus is the way. Let me just say that right now. We'll get that on video. I believe Jesus is the way. I don't want to be ambiguous or fuzzy about any of that. I believe Jesus is the way. The way of love, faith, hope, reconciliation, radical rethinking, service, self-giving, respect for creation, full surrender to the Spirit, truly is the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to God based on following a religious agenda of hate, fear, despair, division, conventional thinking, domination, greed, disrespect for creation, or full conformity to this or that ism. No matter how much God talk and text quoting we dress it all up in. This is what I believe Jesus is getting at. Now, there's also something really cool happening in the text here. We feeling good so far? All right. Just a couple more points, and then we're out of here, and we're just going to walk out that door. All right. John is doing something, or whoever's writing this in the name of John in the community, they're doing they're using a little bit of a literary device here. All right. So it's good to just know this. When you read the book of John, scholarship have pointed out there's two major things that are happening. First of all, he has signs in John. This is a sign. You've seen that? Where there's 7 signs in the book of John. All right? That's all intentional. Where does the 7 come from? 7-day creation. All right? Genesis. Remember who he's writing about. The revisionist Jews and the Orthodox Jews who've excommunicated them. So there's a reason they keep going back to the Torah. All right? It's like they're trying to show these Orthodox Jews in some ways that they're more Orthodox than the Orthodox Jews. Going, we haven't bailed from our fathers and mothers' religion. It's just we've reinterpreted it and realized it's much larger than perhaps what we were told, okay? And so it's a literary device. You have 7 signs, but then check this out. You also, through the book of John, you have 7 I am statements, okay? 7 I am statements. Now, let me give you these statements so you can see them, okay? John 6, I am the bread of life. John 8, I am the light of the world. John 10, I am the gate. John 10, I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. And then, of course, the one we're reading, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And then it's really helpful to read chapter 15 too. I am the vine. I love that. I am the vine, you are the branches. And so if you abide in me and I in you, do you understand now a little more of the context around this verse? It's not about who's going where when they die. It's not about exclusivity. It's about experiencing the divine. That's why he says, I am the vine, you are the branches. Abide in me, and I in you, and God in us in them. Yes, universal, seamless oneness. Yes, that's what they're trying to get at here. And you also need to know that all this imagery that Jesus and John's community is using has all kinds of amazing references to the Old Testament. Again, when he says, I am the bread of life, what is that a reference to? The day the Israelites ran out of food and they needed what? Bread. And manna fell from heaven. Do you understand that? These are all references to the Old Testament. Maybe essentially what he's saying is I need you to get something here. Oh, by the way, talk about a big wink and nod. I don't even know if it's a wink and nod as much as there's a flare gun going up, all right? But when John's community uses these statements, I am, well, what is that a reference to? Anyone who, especially these Orthodox Jews and the revisionist Jews, would know exactly what's going on here. Oh, I get it, all right? Because there was something that happened in the book of Exodus, chapter 3, where Moses is getting ready to go out and lead his people. He's like getting his call to lead the people, and he turns around and he says, all right, I'm going to go tell the Israelites what we got to do. But Yahweh, if someone asks me who sent me, what name am I supposed to give them? And what does the divine voice say? I am. I am. I am that I am. That's clear. I am that I am. As one writer said, God is not claiming to be a being. God is claiming to be being itself. And this is what I believe maybe these writers are getting at, and maybe what Jesus is getting at. I am. It's a reference to Yahweh. It's a reference to the divine. I am is formless. It's spirit. It doesn't have substance. It doesn't have walls around it. It can be very ethereal and ambiguous. What do we mean by I am? Now, I think it's brilliant because it's almost like Moses is trying to box God in, like, give me a name. I am Christian. Knew it. I knew it. I knew you weren't Buddhist. American. Give it to me, God. Give it to me. I am white. Talk to me, God. I knew it. I knew it. It's almost as like these writers knew, if you place anything after I am, we're going to attach to it. And this is almost as if the divine is like, you all are y'all trying to put me in a frame? I simply am. I am being itself. Or as one historian said, the ground of our being. Then Jesus comes along, he says, let's play off that a little bit. I am the bread of life. What maybe is he getting at? You want to experience the divine? Eat some bread. All of these are metaphors. They're all metaphors trying to point to the divine. And it's as if Jesus is saying, or these writers are saying about Jesus, that Jesus incarnates, embodies, and enfleshes what the divine presence is like. And it's so ineffable that in some way what these writers and teachers and rabbis are trying to do is bring this massive, ineffable idea down to a particular. Because the universal always needs a particular. The invisible God is being made visible through Christ's life. And if that is true, if Jesus is what God looks like, then I think it would be fitting even in this context to ask the question, then tell me, how many people did Jesus exclude? Not many. None. But it seems everywhere he goes, including a Roman centurion, he invites in. Yeah. So perhaps this is what the divine is like. It's like these writers are trying to get at. We have seen the oneness of humanity and divinity in Jesus. But it's only when we see the oneness of humanity and divinity in Jesus that maybe, just maybe, we can start to understand that it doesn't just stay with Jesus, but that's also true with us. That maybe we can begin to see the oneness of the divine and the human within us. But tragically, the severing of the spiritual from the physical has captivated the Western world. And I want to tell you this, there's no such thing as secular. This week, the algorithms, you're already familiar with the algorithms? I want to say something publicly. The algorithms are getting us. I'm not worried much about AI. Part of the reason is because I don't know anything about it. And ignorance is bliss. You know what I'm talking about? There's some truth in that statement. People that work in AI are like, you should be. I'm like, just don't tell me. We're good. Not worried about AI. What I am a little bit concerned about is algorithms. I'll tell you why. Here's a perfect example. On the way to church today, Katie said, this is truth. Got in the car. I've been up, got up early, read over my notes, shifted some things, moved some things. It's going to be a great day. I get in the car. Katie is upstairs getting dressed. We get down in the car. She usually is like, what playlist are we going with? It's not uncommon for us to fire up Stephen Curtis Chapman. We listen to Christian music on Sundays. Oh, yeah. I like going back. I like to feel nostalgic and walk in and pretend I'm in a suit. I still wish one Sunday, we should have an old school evangelical one Sunday where all the musicians play old hymns. And then I get up and just give a hellfire one. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, like, dangle our souls over it and be like, yes, God, something in me would kind of enjoy that. Also, I'm glad Kevin's back. He'd been gone for 2 Sundays. I text him and I'm like, Ichabod, the spirit left. I felt no anointing. I've never used that word in my life. All right. So with that, we want to feel like I have to push my feelings there, and so it's not uncommon for us to listen to some Christian music. Like we'll go way back, and but today we get in the car and she's like, "Did you hear about that pastor?" I'm like, "Well, first, yeah, I've heard about many of them." Yes, she's like, "It is like his wife," and she went in this whole story. I don't know anything about it, but this is a whole story. And I said, "No," she said, "It's everywhere," and I just kind of paused, like, "Is it everywhere?" Like, we're just kind of joking. I was like, is it everywhere? And she's like, all over the feed. And I'm like, algorithms. I don't know if you know this, but I mean, algorithms have gone up new levels. If you click on one or two things, here's what's really bizarre to me. It makes you believe that the only thing the entire world is looking at is what you're looking at. That the world's consumed with what you are consumed with. It's quite wild. And so, what was I talking about, Katie? Do you remember? Yeah, I know I was talking about the algorithms. Do you know where we're going with this? Does anyone know? God, this has happened too much to me. Okay, it's the algorithms. I'll catch it in just a minute, all right? Give me a second. I'll just keep talking until I get there. The idea, I think, that maybe I was getting at is almost like, so people have used this phrase, an echo chamber. You heard this? Echo chamber. And it's like you begin to believe that the only thing the world is seeing is what you are seeing. And so, here was my point, just got me. I was online, and I've been on Threads recently. It's like a new format because we're protesting the other one, and so I was on Threads, and I get on Threads, and I'm like, I see this tweet, and I know better. If you click on something, the game's over. And I've tried to trick the algorithms. You know what I'm talking about? I've tried to go around the algorithms and trick them. And so I'll click on that, but then I'll find like a Joel Osteen video and click on 5 of them to see if we can flip the narrative. But it's almost like they know your soul going, you don't want that one. You really want that one. And I'm like, God, what is going? I mean, these people are in our bodies. I'm like, it's a little frightening. But I clicked on one and it was so silly and it said something. I mean, it was utterly ridiculous. And of course, that's the click, right? That's the bait. And I click on it. And anyways, it was this whole conversation about literally some evangelical talking about Taylor Swift and secular music. And apparently that's a thing right now where evangelicals have just thrown her under the bus going, she's demonic, and and I just kind of smiled going, God, they haven't grown 1 inch. Like, because I grew up in that world, and it wasn't Taylor Swift, it was Amy Grant. Do you know what I'm talking about? It was Amy Grant did like this. She's the Antichrist. I'm like, if Amy Grant's the Antichrist, that whole movement's not going very well. You know what I mean? Can we throw that out? If Amy Grant is leading the charge, not really a threat to the kingdom of God, all right? Like if the best Lucifer has is, who can we use? Oh, Amy Grant. I think we're going to be fine, all right? So I click on it, and this just goes to this whole riff about Taylor Swift, and then at the bottom of it just said, and that's the problem with secular music. And I threw up in my mouth just a little bit. Like, oh. And I paused because I didn't want, I think where we struggle as like progressives or people that are evolving or post-evangelicals is we can be very condescending towards people, I'm working. That's a part of my work. You worry about your own work. I'm working on mine. But I can be very condescending. You can find me rolling my eyes sometimes. Like, I don't even have space and time for that. Do you know what I'm talking about? But that's not going to help anything. I want you to know that. Rolling your eyes at your loved ones who are not as enlightened as you are, that's not going to get us anywhere. It's not. But then I realized, maybe this is what if we could get back here, this is a part of what I'm trying to teach us. And I didn't write it because I don't have the energy. And I don't even know this person. And I knew the algorithms got me. So I was like, just whatever. But I just wanted to write, there is no such thing as secular. That's it. But what good is that? It's going to create a riff, and then, it might give me followers. That's all we got. There is no such thing as secular. And I remember, God, that would have been a large statement when I was first starting out. Again, A to Z. If someone had told me, hey, bud, I know you're throwing away your Tupac CDs in the Christian bonfire. And I did burn them right up. Music was the thing. Music and sex was like the big two things growing up in youth ministry. And it was like, don't be looking at girls, don't be listening to bad music, and you'll be fine, all right? And so I did. I was like, praise the Lord, I pledged my life to purity, and I threw every secular CD I had in the fire and just watched it go up and loved it. But I have regrets now, but I loved it then, okay? But here's the thing. It would have been wild if someone had come up to me at that little bonfire going, hey, bud, you don't know this now, and it probably ain't going to make any sense to you, but when you get like in your 40s, you're going to realize something really crazy. There is no such thing as secular. That's a false dichotomy. It doesn't even exist. You know why I can say that? Well, I can say that in many ways, but one way is this, because there is no place where God is not. Like, show me one place where God is not, and I will tell you. Now that we can call unsacred or secular. There is no place where the divine is not present. Yeah. And I think maybe this is a part of what's happening, the severing of the spiritual from the physical. And it's like maybe, as John Philip Newell said, the deeper we move into the body of creation, the closer we come to the presence of God. Or as one writer said, at the heart of the material is always the spiritual. But the only way maybe we're able to see that is if we can't see it through the way of Jesus. I don't know if we're ever going to be able to see it within ourselves or anyone else. And I think that's why he doubles down. Because he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Here's the double down. No one comes to the Father but through me. It can be a hard statement to hear, but if you understand it in its context, that this is a counterclaim to the exclusivity of the temple. Do you hear that? The Orthodox Jews were saying, you only can come to God through our house, the Father's house, the temple. That's it. And Jesus comes along and says, actually not true. And this community says, actually, we counter your claim. You come to the Father only through Jesus. Now, let me explain to you what I see this is, and then we're done. I don't think this is an objective claim for the entire world. This is where I need to be really careful. I don't see it as an objective claim for the entire world, okay? I see this in a couple ways. First of all, if I were to make a statement to my wife, Katie, you are the most beautiful person in the entire world. Hear me when I say that. I believe that. I believe that. But I'm also not asking us to have a beauty pageant. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm not like, now let's actually place Katie up with all the women in the world and let's objectively make a claim. All in favor say aye, right? No, it's a statement of affection. It'd be like if your son or daughter was like, you're the best mom in the world. You're not like walking around knocking on neighbor's house going, check it out, I got it. It's like on Elf when he's like the best coffee in the world, right? Like he interprets that literally like, congratulations. You have the best coffee in the world, right? This is what I believe is happening in this moment. These people have had an encounter with the divine through Jesus, and they've got a whole bunch of people that are gatekeepers going, listen, you can only get to the temple, and they counter it going, nonsense, no, it's only through what is happening in Jesus that we're able to even understand and experience the divine. Because if we can't get that the divine and the human come together in Jesus, then we'll never get it within ourselves, so you cannot get there outside of this. Yes. He's not saying you can't get to heaven unless you confess and believe with your mouth. No, we're not even close to that. That's evangelicalism. This is next level stuff we're talking about. John's on a whole nother plane. All right? Yeah. Maybe one way to say it is John Shelby Spong said it like this. We are not separated from the God of our fathers and mothers as the Orthodox party was asserting. So think about this is what they're saying. These are what the writer is saying. We are not separated from the God of our fathers and mothers as the Orthodox party is claiming we are. Jesus is the very way through which we walk into the same divine mystery that our ancestors knew. We know of no other way that we can come to the God of our fathers and mothers except through this Jesus. That was a testimony to their experience. It was not a prescription claiming that they possess the only doorway into the only God. John Shelby Spong went on to say this, there is a difference between affirming that I walk into the mystery of God through the doorway called Jesus, and that in my experience, this is the only doorway that works in my journey, versus asserting there is no doorway through which anyone can walk except mine. Imagine the idolatry present in the suggestion that God must be bound by my knowledge and my experience. Wow. It's through Jesus we now know that we have always been one with the divine. Jesus did not come to build a bridge to God. Jesus came to show us we never needed a bridge to God because we were never separated from God because we've always been one with God. And you don't have to try and get close to God because check this out, you are in God and God is in Christ and Christ is in you. The divine is closer to us than the breath that we breathe in this moment. Yes. And how do I know that? Because of Jesus. So, you might be here going, I like it. I like it. But just one more thing and we're done. Just one more. We bought lunch anyway, so you can go anywhere. You're good. One more thing here. I like it. And I've had, and there, if you're like conservative or fundamentalist might say this because I've had them say it. Well, that's cute, but Jesus did not say, I will show you the way. He said, I am the way. Yes, sir. I like that. And here's what I will say. Great. If any one of you are in this room and this is the point of contention for you, I feel it. I'm not ignoring it. I've given you my best interpretation of where I'm at right now with it, but I feel it. I'm also 100% thrilled if you're in here going, absolutely, emphatically not. I believe Jesus is the only way to God, period, in that they're not just speaking about their own experience. I believe that's true. Universal speaking, I believe it's true. And I would say to you, right on, I'm with you, actually. I'm with you. But I think what might be helpful is if you hear the way Rob spoke about this. So can I just give you 3 lines from him? I love this. Because even if you subscribe to that going, it's absolutely through Jesus and Jesus only. Wonderful. Yes, I'm with you. I think it would just be helpful to hear these words. What he doesn't say, speaking of Jesus, is how or when or in what manner the mechanism functions that gets people to God through him. Did you hear that? What he doesn't say is how or when or in what manner the mechanism functions that gets people to God through him. He doesn't even state those coming to the Father through him will even know that they are coming exclusively through him. And so, maybe we can say the realization of the fact that there are many ways to experience the divine is because, and I'm only speaking on John's community here, John's community fully believed. And remember this. This was a first century sacrificial culture. And John was very clear. How did John portray the death of Christ? He portrayed it as a sacrifice. In a sacrificial world where you're offering up animals to please the gods, you better believe they stood their ground to say Jesus is the only sacrifice that got us in right standing with God. Yes, they believed that. They were also a part of a sacrificial culture. We've now moved on in our lives, and we've realized, actually, we kept looking at this Jesus. And as the rabbis talked about, you turn it like a diamond, and you see different refractions. And we keep turning it. Every Sunday, that's what we're doing here. We're turning it. And now, all of a sudden, we're going, that was a giant leap. This statement in the first century, do you know how massive that was to the Orthodox Jews going, get out of here with that blasphemy? But then we kept going, and they're saying the same thing about us. But we kept turning it, and what we realized was, oh my gosh, they're actually, the sacrifice wasn't even, no sacrifice was needed, because turns out God wasn't really all that upset. Because in fact, what we've learned now is God was actually love. And if we've learned anything, we've learned this truth, that the divine in Jesus, we keep coming back because we see the divine and the human coming together. And I only know that because, first and foremost for me, I've seen it in him. And somehow the invisible has to be made visible. Otherwise, we just don't get it. So, yep. I should have stopped. Y'all clapped a little while ago, and I wish I'd stopped there, but here we are. So, I'm going to close, but he knows I still have something else in me, and it's like, just shut it down. I say this. When I go to downtown Atlanta, I go drive to Atlanta, Katie gets so frustrated at me because she's like, you've lived here for 23 years, and you still can't get to places in Atlanta. I have no clue. I'll tell you what I do. I cut on Waze. I'm going to say this. For me, there's only one way I can get to Atlanta. Through Waze. Are you saying there is only one way to Atlanta? I'm saying there are many roads that lead to Atlanta, but I'm telling you, for me, there is only one way to get to Atlanta, and that is through navigation. All right? Maybe that's what we're getting at. Okay, let me just say this in closing. Jesus essentially says, can you show us the Father? And he says, what do you mean? You've seen the Father. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And then he also goes on to say this, I'm the Father in one. We're all one. And he says, show us Father. You go out and display the Father. So I just take it one step and say, if you think that Jesus is making an exclusive claim, I actually think it's true about us too. And I know that can sound border blasphemy, but I want to ask you, can people see the divine through you? What if you were the way to God for someone?